The deep, ancient woods were a place of shadows and secrets, a realm where the rules of the modern world faded into the whispers of the wind through the pine needles. It was in this primordial darkness that a lone figure moved with a desperate, frantic grace. Her name was Nova, and she was running. Each gasp of cold air burned her lungs, and the damp earth soaked through her thin shoes, but she dared not stop. The scent of moss, damp soil, and her own fear was a thick perfume in the night. Behind her, though she could no longer hear them, she knew they were coming. The warriors of the Crimson Shadow Pack were relentless, and she had made a terrible mistake by crossing onto their land. She was an Omega, the lowest of the low in any werewolf hierarchy, and trespassing on the territory of the most feared pack in all the realms was a death sentence. Her only hope was to put as much distance between herself and her former life as possible, to find some forgotten corner of the world where her status wouldn't define her existence. But hope was a fragile thing, a tiny, flickering candle in the overwhelming darkness of the forest. The snap of a twig to her left was her only warning. It was too calculated, too perfectly placed to be an accident of the forest. Before she could pivot and change direction, a massive fur-covered body slammed into her side, knocking the air from her lungs and sending her tumbling across the leaf-strewn ground. A second wolf, then a third, emerged from the shadows, their eyes glowing like embers in the night. They circled her, low growls rumbling in their chests, a sound that vibrated through the very earth beneath her. Nova scrambled backward until her back hit the rough bark of an ancient oak tree, trapping her. She curled in on herself, making her body small, a subconscious Omega response to dominant aggression. There was no fight left in her, only the cold, crushing weight of capture. Powerful jaws, careful not to break skin but firm enough to promise they could, closed around her upper arm, and she was hauled to her feet. They didn't bother to shift back to their human forms. Her crime didn't warrant that courtesy. She was simply dragged, stumbling and exhausted, deeper into the heart of the territory she had been foolish enough to enter. The journey was a blur of fear and fatigue. The towering trees eventually gave way to a vast clearing, and in the center stood a sight that made Nova's blood run cold. It was a fortress of stone and timber, a testament to immense power and ancient wealth. This was the stronghold of the Crimson Shadow Pack, and at its helm was a king whose name was spoken with reverence and terror, Sorin. Torches flickered, casting dancing light on stern-faced warriors who lined the path to the Great Hall. They watched her, this dirty, disheveled Omega, with a mixture of curiosity and disdain. The massive wooden doors of the hall groaned open, and she was thrust inside. The air within was thick with the scent of pine smoke, roasted meat, and the raw, potent power of dozens of dominant alphas. Her Omega instincts screamed at her to drop her gaze, to bare her neck, to show submission to every single wolf in the room. But a tiny, stubborn spark within her refused to be completely extinguished. At the far end of the hall, on a throne carved from a single massive obsidian stone, sat the source of all the power in the room, Sorin the Alpha King. He was not lounging casually. He was perched on the edge of his throne, his posture radiating a contained, simmering energy that was far more intimidating than any overt display of rage. He was dressed in simple dark clothes that did nothing to hide the sheer muscular power of his frame. His hair was the color of dark ash, and his eyes, which locked onto her the moment she entered, were a piercing stormy gray that seemed to see right through her. Nova was forced to her knees at the foot of the dais, the stone cold and unyielding beneath her. The warrior who had dragged her in spoke, his voice echoing in the suddenly silent hall. "We found this Omega trespassing in the eastern woods, my king. She bears no pack markings." Sorin didn't look at the warrior. His gaze remained fixed on Nova. He slowly rose from his throne, and his height was imposing, his shadow stretching out to engulf her. He descended the 2 steps of the dais until he was standing directly over her. The silence stretched, heavy and suffocating. He leaned down, his movement fluid and predatory, and inhaled deeply near her hair. He wasn't just smelling her fear, he was smelling her. Her essence. Something flickered in those stormy eyes, a momentary crack in the mask of cold authority, so fast she thought she might have imagined it. "An Omega," he said, his voice a low, resonant rumble that vibrated in her bones. "Alone. On my land. You are either incredibly brave or incredibly foolish. The ancient laws are clear. Trespassers are punished." His words were final, a death knell. It was that finality that ignited the last of Nova's courage. She forced her head up, ignoring every instinct that shrieked at her to submit, and met his gaze. Her voice, though shaky, was clear in the vast hall. "I meant no disrespect, Alpha. I was only running. My My previous pack, it was not a kind place. I was trying to find somewhere, anywhere, else. She swallowed hard, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. Punish me if you must, but know I entered your territory seeking refuge, not conflict. Her directness, her refusal to look away, caused a murmur to ripple through the assembled warriors. No one spoke to the Alpha King like that. Sorin's eyebrows lifted slightly, a fraction of an inch. The anger in his expression seemed to shift, morphing into something more complex, more calculating. He studied her for a long minute, the entire hall holding its breath. A slow, dangerous smile touched his lips, but it didn't reach his eyes. Running, he repeated as if tasting the word. A little Omega, all alone in the big dark woods. How very interesting. He straightened up, looking down at her from his full height. I find myself bored. And your bravery amuses me. So I will offer you a bargain. A single chance for your freedom. Nova's breath hitched. Freedom. The word was a beacon, almost too painful to hope for. Sorin continued, his voice dropping to an almost intimate tone, though it carried to every corner of the silent room. You will come with me. You will spend one night, alone with me, in my private chambers. Survive the night. Do not flee. Do not break. Stay until the sun crests the mountains. If you can do this, if you can endure a single night in my presence, I will not only spare your life, I will set you free. You will have my personal protection to leave this territory and go wherever you wish, unharmed by any of my wolves. He paused, letting the offer hang in the air, before his voice hardened again, the danger returning. But, if you try to run before the sun rises, my entire pack will hunt you, and they will not bring you back. Do you understand the terms of my bargain? The offer was insane. Terrifying. What did he mean by survive? What horrors awaited her in his rooms? But the alternative was certain punishment, likely death. And the prize? The prize was everything she had been running toward. It was a mad, dangerous game, but it was the only game being offered. Nova, her knees aching on the cold stone, her body trembling with a mixture of terror and a wild, desperate hope, looked up at the formidable Alpha King and gave a single, sharp nod. I understand, she whispered. I accept your bargain. The journey from the grand, echoing hall to the Alpha King's private chambers was a silent, surreal procession. Nova walked, her steps feeling both heavy and weightless, a few paces behind Sorin's imposing form. The pack warriors who had been her captors now fell away, melting back into the shadows of the fortress, their duty apparently fulfilled by delivering her to their king. They navigated a series of wide, torchlit corridors, the stone walls adorned with tapestries depicting great battles and legendary wolves of the pack's history. The air grew quieter the further they went, the raucous noise of the main hall fading into a distant murmur, then into nothing at all. The only sound was the firm, steady tread of Sorin's boots on the stone floor and the much softer, hesitant shuffle of her own worn-out shoes. He didn't look back at her, didn't speak a word, his broad shoulders a wall of silent authority. They came to a stop before a set of double doors made of a rich, dark wood, intricately carved with scenes of the moon and forests. This was clearly a place of utmost privacy, a world away from the public spectacle of the throne room. Sorin pushed one door open and stood aside, gesturing for her to enter first. It was a small gesture, but it felt significant, almost courteous, which was utterly confusing given the circumstances. Nova hesitated for a heartbeat on the threshold, then stepped inside. The room beyond was not what she had feared. She had expected a dungeon-like cell, or perhaps a room filled with weapons and trophies, a reflection of the fierce king she had met in the hall. Instead, she found herself in a spacious and surprisingly comfortable sitting room. A large fireplace dominated one wall, a low fire already crackling within, casting a warm, dancing light that pushed back the night's chill. Plush rugs covered the stone floor and comfortable-looking chairs and a large sofa were arranged around the hearth. Books lined shelves on another wall, and the air smelled faintly of wood smoke, leather, and something uniquely clean and wild, like the forest after a rain. It was, she realized with a start, his scent. This was his personal space, a side of the Alpha King no one in the hall below had ever seen. Sorin closed the door behind them, the soft click of the latch sounding incredibly final in the quiet room. He moved past her, going to a small cabinet and pouring a dark liquid into 2 glasses. He was still the same powerful, intimidating man, but here in this intimate setting, the edges seemed slightly softer. The terrifying king on the throne was now just a man in his private rooms with a captive guest? Prisoner? Nova wasn't sure what she was anymore. Sit, he said, his voice quieter than it had been in the hall, though it still held that same undeniable command. He gestured to the sofa near the fire. He handed her one of the glasses. "Drink. It will warm you." Nova looked at the offered glass, then at him, suspicion warring with a deep, bone-level exhaustion. Slowly she accepted it, her fingers brushing against his for a fleeting second. A jolt, like a tiny spark of lightning, passed between them at the contact. She saw his eyes flicker down to where their hands had touched, a slight frown creasing his brow, but he said nothing. She sat on the very edge of the sofa, her posture rigid, the glass clutched tightly in her hands. He took the chair opposite, watching her. The silence stretched, filled only by the pop and crackle of the fire. Nova stared into the amber liquid in her glass, too nervous to drink it, too scared to look at him. She was hyper-aware of his every movement, every breath he took. This was the test then. This unbearable, waiting silence. This was what she had to survive. It must have been a very bad place. His voice broke the quiet suddenly, making her jump. "The pack you ran from." It wasn't a question but a statement. He was watching her, those storm-gray eyes intent. To make an Omega attempt a crossing into unknown territory alone. That speaks of a desperation I find distasteful. Nova finally dared to look up at him. The firelight played across the sharp planes of his face, highlighting his strong jaw and the thoughtful, almost brooding expression he now wore. The outright anger was gone, replaced by a piercing curiosity. She found her voice, though it was little more than a whisper. It was. For an Omega, life is, it is about survival. Not living. We are at the bottom. We serve. We are blamed. We are nothing. She couldn't keep the old, familiar bitterness from seeping into her tone. Sorin took a slow sip from his own glass. "And you believe life elsewhere will be different?" he asked, his tone not mocking but genuinely probing. "It has to be," she said, a little more strength entering her voice. "It has to be. Or what is the point of any of it?" She finally took a small sip of the drink he'd given her. It was strong and warm, spreading a comforting heat through her chest. He nodded slowly as if her answer confirmed something for him. "You are not what I expected," he admitted, setting his glass down. "When they brought you in covered in dirt and defiance, most would be weeping. Or begging. You met my eyes. You spoke your piece. That is not the behavior of a broken Omega." "Maybe I'm just good at hiding how broken I am," she replied, a sad, small smile touching her lips for the first time. Another long silence fell, but this one was different. It was less charged with fear, more filled with a strange, shared contemplation. He asked her more questions not as a king interrogating a prisoner, but as a man trying to understand a puzzle. He asked about her life, her dreams before she presented as an Omega, the small joys she had managed to find. And in turn, almost without meaning to, she found herself asking him things. "Is it lonely? Being up here? Away from everyone?" Sorin's gaze grew distant, fixed on the flames. "The weight of a crown is a solitary burden," he said, and his voice held a depth of weariness she recognized. It was the fatigue of a constant performance. Everyone sees the king, the power, the title. They see the warrior, the leader. They see what they need to see. No one sees. He trailed off, shaking his head slightly as if he had said too much. "No one sees the man," Nova finished softly. His eyes snapped back to hers, and the look in them was so intense, so utterly focused on her, that it stole the air from her lungs. It was as if she had spoken a truth he had long kept hidden. The space between them seemed to shrink, charged with a new, different kind of energy. The initial fear was still there, a constant hum in the background, but it was now tangled with a compelling, magnetic pull. She was noticing things she hadn't before, the way a lock of his dark hair fell across his forehead, the surprising gentleness in his eyes when he wasn't wearing his kingly mask, the sheer, solid presence of him that seemed to fill the room. Time lost all meaning. They talked for what felt like both minutes and hours. The fire burned lower. The night deepened outside the windows. The bargain, the threat, it all began to feel like a dream from another lifetime. Here, in this warm room, he was just Sorin. And she was just Nova. The Alpha and the Omega titles started to feel like ill-fitting clothes they had both shrugged off for a little while. He moved from his chair to sit on the sofa beside her, not touching her, but close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from his body. He was so much bigger up close. His presence was overwhelming, but not in a way that made her want to flee. It made her feel anchored. "The test tonight," he said, his voice a low, intimate rumble that she felt more than heard. "It was never about physical endurance. Or about me inflicting some horror upon you. He turned his body slightly to face her, his gaze holding hers captive. The danger was always this. This conversation. This proximity. The test was to see if you could see the man behind the crown without being terrified of him. And the test was for me, to see if I could be near someone who wasn't terrified of me. To see if that pull I felt the moment you entered my hall was real or just a trick of the moonlight. Nova's heart was hammering again, but it was a different kind of frantic rhythm now. What pull? She breathed, her voice barely audible. Instead of answering with words, he slowly, so slowly she could have pulled away at any second, raised his hand. He cupped the side of her face, his thumb gently stroking her cheek. His touch was surprisingly warm, surprisingly gentle, and it sent a shiver of pure, undiluted sensation straight through her. Her eyes fluttered closed for a second at the contact. This was the true danger of the night. Not a threat of pain, but the terrifying, beautiful promise of something she had never dared to hope for. When she opened her eyes, his face was closer, his stormy gaze dark with an emotion she couldn't name but felt deep in her soul. He leaned in, closing that final, breathless space between them, and his lips met hers. The world did not so much fall away as it simply ceased to exist. There was no cold stone fortress, no dangerous bargain, no past and no uncertain future. There was only the shocking, profound sensation of Sorin's lips on hers. It was not a harsh or demanding kiss, not the claiming of a conqueror, but something far more devastating in its tenderness. It was an exploration, a question asked in the most intimate language possible. His mouth was warm and moved over hers with a reverence that made Nova's head spin. The hand that cupped her cheek held her as if she were something precious, a fragile treasure he was afraid to break. A small, involuntary sound, a sigh of pure surrender, escaped her, and she felt him deepen the kiss in response, his other hand coming up to cradle the back of her head, his fingers tangling gently in her hair. The fear that had been her constant companion for so long didn't vanish, but it transformed, melting under the heat of this connection into a thrilling, breathless anticipation. She found herself kissing him back, her own hands, which had been clenched tightly in her lap, uncurling and tentatively rising to rest against the solid, unyielding wall of his chest. She could feel the powerful beat of his heart beneath her palm, a wild, racing rhythm that matched her own. When he finally broke the kiss, it was only by a fraction of an inch, their foreheads resting together, their breath mingling in the small, heated space between them. Nova's eyes remained closed, trying to imprint every detail of the feeling into her memory, the scent of him, the feel of his skin, the taste of him on her lips. It was a feeling of rightness, of homecoming, so profound and so unexpected that it left her reeling. She felt him take a slow, shuddering breath. "Do you feel it now?" he whispered, his voice rough with an emotion that shook her to her core. "That pull? It is not just me." She could only nod, her voice stolen away by the enormity of what had just happened. She did feel it. It was a physical force, a golden thread pulling taut between their hearts, a connection so deep and fundamental it felt as ancient as the moon itself. He pulled back just enough to look into her eyes, his own gaze blazing with a fierce, awestruck light. "Nova," he said, and her name on his lips was a prayer. "You are my fated mate. My wolf knew it the moment you entered the hall. It knew your scent, your spirit. It is why I made that mad bargain. I could not let you go. Not without knowing if your human heart could feel it too." The words landed not with a shock, but with a deep, resonating truth that settled into her bones. Fated mate. The most sacred bond in the werewolf world. A gift from the moon goddess herself. It was the stuff of legends, of bedtime stories told to young pups. It was a dream that every wolf harbored but few ever realized. And it was supposed to be impossible. An alpha king, the most powerful of his kind, was destined for a strong Luna from a noble bloodline, not a runaway Omega with nothing to her name. The practical, survivalist part of her brain, the part that had kept her alive through years of hardship, tried to rebel. This was a trick. A cruel game played by a powerful man who was bored. It was too fantastical, too perfect. She drew back from him, breaking the physical connection, and the loss of his touch felt like a physical wound. She wrapped her arms around herself, the confusion and doubt crashing back in like a tidal wave. "That's not possible," she said, her voice trembling. "You're the Alpha King. I'm nobody, an Omega. We exist to serve, not to be a queen's equal. It doesn't work that way. It can't." She looked at him, searching his face for any sign of deception, any hint that this was an elaborate jest. "Is this the real test? Is this the part where you show me how foolish I was to hope for something better? To make me believe in a fairy tale before you cast me out?" Sorin's expression softened, but there was no mockery in it, only a profound and patient understanding. He didn't try to reach for her again. He simply let her have her space, let her process the impossible. "I told you the test was the conversation, the proximity," he reminded her gently. This is the truth that the test revealed. My wolf does not lie, Nova. It recognizes its other half. It has been waiting for you. I have been waiting for you, though I did not know what I was waiting for until I saw you, dirty and defiant on my floor." He let out a slow breath. "I feel the bond. It is there, fragile and new, but it is there. A thread of gold in my soul, and it leads directly to you." He leaned forward, his elbows on his knees, his hands clasped together. He was giving her room, but his entire being was focused on her. "The bargain I made still stands. It is more important now than ever. When the sun rises, the choice is yours. You can walk out of that door. You can have your freedom. I will honor my word. I will let you go, and it will be the hardest thing I have ever had to do in my long life, but I will do it. Because a true bond cannot be forced. Cannot be a chain. It must be a choice." The raw honesty in his voice was more convincing than any grand declaration or command could ever be. He was laying his own heart bare, offering her everything, while being willing to accept nothing if that was her choice. Nova stared at him, her mind a whirlwind of conflicting emotions. The dream of freedom, the one thing she had fought for, run for, almost died for, was being offered to her on a silver platter. All she had to do was walk away from this man who looked at her as if she held the entire universe in her eyes. This man who spoke of a bond she could feel humming in her own veins, a song she hadn't known her soul could sing. She thought of her life before, the constant fear, the loneliness that was a cold, empty ache, the certainty that she would never be seen, never be valued for anything other than her submissive status. She thought of the stories of fated mates, of a love so powerful it could defy tradition, shatter expectations and rewrite destiny itself. She looked around the room, at the dying embers in the fireplace, at the comfortable intimacy of this private sanctuary he had shared with her. She looked at Sorin, at the quiet strength in his posture, the vulnerability he was showing only to her. This was not the act of a cruel king. This was the offering of a lonely man to the one person who might finally see him. The fear and doubt began to recede, not vanishing entirely, but being overshadowed by a new, burgeoning feeling, one that was warmer and brighter and more terrifying than any fear: hope. A wild, reckless, glorious hope. She didn't know what the future held. The world would rage against a king and his Omega mate. But as she looked at him, waiting for her decision with a patience that spoke volumes, she knew, with a certainty that went beyond thought, that a freedom without him would be just another kind of prison. The real choice wasn't between captivity and freedom. It was between a lonely freedom and a belonging so profound it would redefine her very soul. The first hint of dawn was not a sight, but a feeling. A subtle, almost imperceptible shift in the quality of the darkness outside the great windows of Sorin's chambers. The deep, velvety black of the deepest night began to soften at its edges, thinning to a muted gray. Inside the room, the fire had burned down to a bed of glowing crimson coals, their light pulsing gently like a sleeping heart. The silence was profound, a held breath stretching between them. Nova had not moved from the sofa for a long time, lost in the labyrinth of her own thoughts, while Sorin had remained in his chair, a statue of patient vigilance. He had given her his truth, laid his soul bare, and now he was honoring his word by giving her the space to decide his fate and her own. The weight of the coming sunrise was a physical pressure in the room. Each passing minute brought the moment of decision closer, and Nova could feel the two paths of her future diverging before her, both terrifying in their own way. She watched him as he stared into the dying embers, his profile stark and handsome in the faint light. In the quiet hours she had seen the full weight of the crown he bore. She had seen the loneliness that was the price of his power, the isolation that came from being the one who always had to command, to judge, to protect, but never simply to be. He had offered her a choice not as her king, but as her potential mate. He was willing to shatter centuries of tradition and face the certain uproar of his entire pack for her, but only if she chose him in return. That was the most powerful thing he had ever given her, a true, uncoerced choice. It was the antithesis of everything she had ever known as an Omega. She was not being commanded, she was being asked. The realization was a key turning in a lock deep inside her, opening a door to a courage she hadn't known she possessed. A sliver of pale, gold light pierced the horizon, cutting like a blade through the gray pre-dawn. It sliced through the window and fell across the floor between them, a luminous line separating the night that was ending from the day that was beginning. This was it. The bargain was fulfilled. The night had been survived. Sorin slowly turned his head to look at her. His stormy eyes were calm, but in their depths she could see a universe of hope and fear warring. He did not speak. He simply waited. Nova rose from the sofa. Her legs felt weak, but her resolve did not. She took a single step, then another, crossing the room until she stood before his chair. The first ray of sunlight touched the side of her face, warming her skin. She looked down at him, at the man who had offered her both a game and a destiny, a prison and a throne. She saw not the Alpha King but Sorin. Just Sorin. The man whose kiss had felt like coming home. She slowly sank to her knees before him, not in submission but in reverence. She reached out and took his large, strong hands in her smaller ones, feeling the strength there, the gentle warmth. He watched her, his breath catching in his chest, every muscle in his body tense with anticipation. Nova looked up, meeting his gaze, and her voice, when it came, was clear and steady, filled with a certainty that rang through the silent room. "I am choosing to stay," she said, each word a vow. "Not because of a bargain, not because of a title, and not because I fear the world outside. I am choosing to stay because my place is with you. My heart is with you. Where you are is my freedom. Where you are is my home." For a heartbeat there was absolute stillness. And then the emotion that broke across Sorin's face was so raw, so powerful, it was like watching the sun itself rise in his eyes. All the fear and tension drained away, replaced by a joy so immense it was almost blinding. A low, heartfelt sound, part growl, part sigh of utter relief, rumbled from his chest. In one fluid motion, he was out of the chair and on his knees before her, his hands coming up to cradle her face, his thumbs stroking her cheeks. "Nova," he breathed, her name a benediction on his lips. And then he kissed her. This kiss was different from the first. The first had been a question, a discovery. This kiss was an answer. It was a claiming and a surrender all at once. It was filled with all the promise of the dawn outside, all the passion that had been held in check through the long night, all the devastating love of a fated bond finally, fully acknowledged. It was deep and hungry and tender, a seal upon the vow they had just made to each other. When they finally broke apart, both were breathless, forever altered by the moment. He helped her to her feet, his arms wrapping around her, holding her tightly against him as if he would never let go. He buried his face in her hair, inhaling her scent, now forever intertwined with his own. "You will never be a prisoner again," he vowed, his voice thick with emotion. "From this moment on, you are my partner. My equal. My Luna. My queen." The words settled over her, not as a weight, but as a mantle she was finally ready to wear. Later, as the sun climbed higher, bathing the world in its full golden light, Sorin led Nova back to the great hall. The pack was already gathering, murmuring expectantly, having heard the news of the strange bargain and the Omega who had spent the night with their king. They watched with wide, curious eyes as Sorin, still holding Nova's hand tightly in his, ascended the dais and turned to face them. The air was thick with unasked questions. Sorin's voice, when he spoke, was the powerful, commanding tone of the Alpha King, but it was underscored with a new, undeniable warmth. "Pack of the Crimson Shadow," he began, his gaze sweeping over the assembled wolves. "Last night a bargain was made. It has been fulfilled. But it has also given us a gift far greater than any of us could have imagined." He looked down at Nova beside him, his expression softening for all to see. "This is Nova. She entered our territory seeking refuge and she has found it. But she has given me a far greater gift in return. The moon goddess, in her infinite wisdom, has woven our souls together. She is my fated mate." A stunned silence fell over the hall, followed by a wave of shocked whispers. "An Omega? A fated mate to the king?" It was unprecedented. Sorin let the murmuring continue for a moment before raising his hand for silence, his authority instantly restoring quiet. "From this day forward, the old ways that defined a wolf solely by their rank end here. Worth is not measured by power but by heart, by courage, and by loyalty. Nova has shown me that. She will be your Luna, and you will honor her as you honor me. Not because I command it but because she has earned it." He turned to Nova, and in front of everyone he raised her hand to his lips and kissed it, a gesture of pure, public devotion. The message was clear. This was not a political arrangement. This was love. And as the pack looked at their king, who stood straighter and seemed lighter than he had in years, and at the woman beside him, who met their gazes not with Omega submission, but with a quiet, newfound strength, their shock began to transform. One by one they dipped their heads, not in obedience to an order, but in genuine respect for the bond they witnessed. A new era had begun, not with a battle but with a choice made at sunrise. Their story, which had begun with a dangerous game in the dark, had become a legendary love, a tale that would be told for generations, a testament to the fact that the most powerful force in any world is not strength or rank, but a love brave enough to choose the impossible. If you were swept away by Sorin and Nova's journey, if you felt the pull of their fated bond and the thrill of their dangerous bargain, then you won't want to miss what happens next in their world. Subscribe to the channel to ensure you never miss a story. Dive into countless other tales of passion, power, and destiny waiting for you. A new adventure is always just one click away. Subscribe now.